All right, we still have more, of course, from the Caribbean with the Afro-Exim Bank. Let's take a listen to remarks from Kanayo Awani, who, of course, is the Executive Vice President, Intra-African Trade Bank at the Afro-Exim Bank.
Today, we continue to live, or to give life to the vision of a global Africa, a connected, economically empowered, and prosperous community bound by a shared ancestry, economic ambition, and cultural pride. Allow me a moment of reflection, as just to think back about how the journey began. And I vividly recall one of the several conversations we had with our President, Professor Rama, at a time when the Caribbean barely featured in Africa's strategic economic engagements, save for the pronouncement of the African Union that it was the diaspora was a CIS region. We discussed how it was time we extended our Pan-African mission and to implement our diaspora strategy so that we can connect Africans regardless of geography. And that was in line with our intra-African trade strategy. Our intra-African trade strategy at the bank is the arrowhead of the bank's enterprise strategy. And we had defined intra-African trade at the time as trade between and among African countries, but also trade between Africa and its citizens in diaspora. We called it intra-African with an emphasis on the N, purposefully. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when fear, trepidation, uncertainty grieved our nations, Afro-Exim Bank stepped out to deliver just not financing, but hope. I think this was mentioned by Prime Minister Mia Mottley as well. Through a $2 billion facility, we supported the procurement of over 400 million doses of vaccines for African Union member states, but also for the Caribbean community. This wasn't merely about public health at the time. It was really about restoring our dignity. And through deliberate actions spurred by the crisis of COVID-19 pandemic, the Caribbean emerged as the most natural region for advancing our diaspora strategy, given that they were the most organized as a bloc, and they presented the opportunity to give effect to African Union's pronouncement at the time of the diaspora being the sixth region. This taught us that political will combined with deliberate action has the potential to unlock even deeper economic, social, and cultural relations. At that moment, something shifted for us. It wasn't just a strategic directive. It was a calling to correct the historical wrong that had artificially separated us for far too long. For decades, Africa and the Caribbean had shared pain, shared struggles, and shared historical injustice. But we did not, at that time, have a shared economic destiny. There had to be change, and that is why the bank has been unrelenting to promote integration between Africa and the Caribbean. And it's also why we selected the Africa-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum, this particular panel, From Vision to Reality, as a theme. And this is to demonstrate how we have been working to translate the aspiration of a shared economic destiny into a reality. To demonstrate, distinguished guests, to demonstrate the journey we have traveled in just a few years, a few short years, let me recall some of the ambitions that Professor Rama set out in the inaugural Active in Bridgetown, Barbados in 2022. These included, among others, ensuring that Afro-Exim Bank is empowered to deliver value to Caribbean states through a partnership agreement, opening of an office in the Caribbean, working with countries to establish a Caribbean Export-Import Bank, and committing an investment of $700 million in the Caribbean to support Africa-Caribbean trade and investment. I know there's been a lot of talk about action. There's been a clarion call to action. But with all humility, I think we've acted. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the short 4 years since that historic gathering, first gathering in Bridgetown under the rallying cry of one people and one destiny, we witnessed 7 Caribbean countries, or CARICOM countries, sign the partnership agreement on that day as we opened our books. We have even delivered much more. Today, 13 of the 15 CARICOM countries have acceded to the bank's partnership agreement. We have expanded our financing beyond the original ambition of $700 million, and we have to a transformative $3 billion, enhancing our ability to build, trade, and transform our destinies. We established our CARICOM regional office, indeed, in Bridgetown in 2023, Bridgetown, Barbados in 2023, which is Africaribbean Bank's first permanent residence or presence outside of the African continent. And earlier this year, as President Orama eloquently highlighted, we broke ground for almost $200 million state-of-the-art Africaribbean Bank African Trade Center in the Caribbean, marking a pivotal moment for the trade relations between Africa and the CARICOM. In the 2 years since opening that branch, we have approved over $700 million. There was dollars. We had facilities to St. Lucia in climate adaptation, facilities to Kensington overall management for sports infrastructure that also hosted the 2024 Cricket World Cup in Barbados under our CANEX intervention. We supported the Bahamas Development Bank with financing. We supported JDC Ora Group, Silver Sands expansion in Grenada. We also acted as a joint mandated lead arranger to raise $1.6 billion for the state oil company in Suriname, Stasoli, with the participation of $500 million. Some of them President. And the pipeline continues to deepen. And just now at lunch, I had another discussion with one of the prime ministers and the President Orama on another hotel project in the country. In the Bahamas, we've signed $200 million infrastructure facility. I signed 2 this afternoon. Those were agreements, by the way. And that's in the Bahamas for infrastructure road construction. In Grenada, we are co-financing a world-class tertiary hospital valued at $240 million, and I think President Orama also mentioned it. In Guyana and Suriname, we have also launched a combined $6 billion in local content facilities that have been launched to catalyze indigenous participation, very important in the oil and gas sector. In the Bahamas again, we have also a project preparation facility approved for the development of the Afro-Caribbean Marketplace and Logistics Center on the Grand Bahama Island. In addition, we're also working to ensure that we create the institutions and skills that will ensure economic emancipation. We're also collaborating with the CARICOM Secretariat to conduct a feasibility study for the establishment of a CARICOM Exim Bank that can serve the needs of member countries and leverage trade to deliver development. Much has been said about the Caribbean payment and settlement system modeled after our Pan-African payment and settlement system to decolonize our payment systems and empower regional trade in local currencies. The CAPS, as we now call it, and PAPS, will make it possible for trade in local currencies and is estimated to save over $1 billion annually in foreign exchange conversion costs and settlement delays. To support the technological advancement of our people, we are supporting the P.J. Patterson Institute of Africaribbean Advocacy at the University of West Indies to establish the Africa-Caribbean Hub dedicated to the pioneering work of generative artificial intelligence. It was interesting to hear the discussion on the panel earlier. For too long, and that's in recognition of the fact that for too long, Africa and the Caribbean have been sidelined in the global narrative of technological advancements, particularly in the realm of cutting-edge artificial intelligence. We've also made grants available, to the CARIBCOM Development Fund to launch a resilience and sustainability fund to support the region. We supported, as has been mentioned by Prime Minister Michel, the disaster recovery over post-hurricane burial. We have also supported the creation of the Africa-Caribbean Business Council. And we're also supporting it with technical assistance for startup processes through grants. And this is under the auspices of the African Business Council, as well as the Caribbean Private Sector Organization. We're also unlocking talents of our youth, leveraging the power of the cultural economy. Through CANEX, Africaribbean has made strategic investments in fashion, film, music, gastronomy and culinary arts, and storytelling, raising Caribbean talent on global stages. I will not even go into the details because I think President Rama spent a lot of time talking about the work we've done with Studio 327, providing creative training and film production programs across Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, and Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. All the Caribbean designers were supported to walk the runways of Paris, New York, and Portugal, as well as Tokyo. And also, he also mentioned about the CANEX Book Factory, where we spotlighted Caribbean literary talent and writers from St. Vincent and Grenadines, as well as St. Kitts. And then the work also we've done with the gastronomy vertical with Natasha Deborg and Davisha Buro. Last year also he mentioned that we sponsored a a very landmark music collaboration called the One Drum that brings together Olodum of Brazil, Steve Marley, Jamaica, Flavor of Nigeria, Maforizo of South Africa into a collaboration music production. I wish we could have played that music here. That was, so that you can hear it as well. All this has been made possible through a suite of financing and facilitation products and initiatives, as well as advisory services, which the bank continues to pursue relentlessly and deploy in this region. I know Oke is here, Oke Nhejirika, our Chief Regional Operating Officer, and other distinguished panelists, and I'm hoping that we'll dive into this and others, to excavate some other programs that we can do in the region or that we're doing. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I think that what we are building is not just episodical. And as I mentioned earlier, it's actually action in progress. It is actually also systemic. I think we should pause for a moment and pause, but I do agree that there's a lot of work to be done. We're not there yet. But let's pause for a moment and imagine what success will truly look like when Africa and the Caribbean fully realize economic and social and cultural symbiosis. So much has been spoken about air and maritime connectivity, but can you imagine what will happen when we have weekly direct flights from Lagos to Barbados, Accra to Kingston, Nairobi to Port Spain? As routine, not seasonal, not winter shuttles, not carnival shuttles. In this new reality, container ships shall sail from Abidjan to Georgetown, transporting not only goods, but opportunities. But think about it. Picture a thriving creative economy where African musicians headline sold-out concerts, some concert arenas in Trinidad, in many parts in Barbados, in Grenada, many parts of the Caribbean. Think about our designers who strut down and share runways in a global Africa Fashion Week. Broadcasts from Kingston to Kigali. Our musicians will record collaborative albums, our filmmakers will co-produce content, and our artists will sell to global audiences as well. And these are backed by harmonized intellectual property protections for both the Caribbean and Africa. Imagine also financial services across banking, across fintech, across insurance, even across factoring, as I heard Eric Intong talk about the limitations of letters of credit. And other forms of financial services owned and controlled by African and Caribbean businesses, and joint ventures that are created, supported by Afrexim Bank and interested financiers. Imagine industrial parks in Grenada. I'm glad that Arise is here as well. Suriname and Jamaica, or in Nigeria, Egypt, and Senegal, built with African and Caribbean capital and technical expertise, producing fertilizer, pharmaceuticals, and light manufacturing goods for both regions and for intra-regional consumption, as well as transshipment to other markets. These special economic zones will serve as magnets for private investment and youth employment, generating tens and thousands of skilled jobs and creating new value chains that span the Atlantic. Imagine those industrial parks supported by ports, dry ports, and logistic hubs. The SG of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, Mr. Wamkele Mene, mentioned opportunities as well, in agro-processing and energy. Professor Shibanjo, Nigeria's former vice president, spoke of cooperation in renewable energy projects, as well as value chains in renewable energy, given our shared vulnerabilities in the context of climate issues. Tourism can also be reimagined, not as a leisure alone, but also in the context of medical tourism. Think of cultural festivals that are hosted across both regions. That Calabar Festival can also merge with the Barbadian Carry Fest, as well as the Grenada Spice Mass Carnival here, which will be happening soon. Think of the best athletes in the world, and I think the President Orama has so eloquently spoken about this in the context of Global Africa and the Unity Cup that was sponsored recently, and doing that as part of our institutionalization. Our cultural diplomacy will become soft power in motion, shaping perceptions, building trust, and fueling businesses. And I think the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Madam Selma Hadid, also spoke about the African Caribbean Business Council being strengthened. Yes, it needs to be strengthened as a form of advocacy, having one voice and promoting the consensus around common economic development. We must certainly work to advance the work we're doing on the local content initiative around what we ourselves consider our own critical minerals. This, in our view, is not just utopia. We think it is within reach, but it requires deliberateness, but it also requires partnerships. There is no gainsaying that Afrexim Bank will not be able to do all of this alone. It requires a collective effort. A future where we can ensure that our trade is also not extractive, but a shared enterprise delivering better tomorrow, as we look forward to a future where value is not lost in transit, but a future where it is multiplied through connection. I therefore challenge the panel before me to identify actionable initiatives, or the conversation should aim to come up with actionable initiatives, strategies, and recommendations that will enable us to sustain our shared vision for the foreseeable future, and even as we think about institutionalizing under a Global Africa Commission. Our path forward must be bolder. It must be more intentional. It must be unified. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before I close, it will be remiss of me not to extend a heartfelt invitation. And this is to the upcoming Intra-African Trade Fair that we hold from 4th to 10th of September this year, where the world again will gather again in Algiers, Algeria, for the 4th edition of the Intra-African Trade Fair, where we have expecting over 2,000 exhibitors, 35,000 visitors, and I want to conclude, more than $44 billion in deals, trade and investment deals. Intra-African Trade Fair, IATF as we call it, is not just a fair. It is really an economic revolution. IATF will feature dedicated, specifically Global Africa Diaspora Day, Your Day, a celebration of what connects us, and a launch pad for what empowers us as we continue to move from vision to reality.
All right, that's the Arise News exclusive coverage of the 2025 Africaribbean Trade and Investment Forum going on in Grenada. We will continue to bring you updates from that, of course, brought to you by the AfriExim.